Hello everybody, this is Tyler here once again from the Character Workshop, now finally back on schedule. First off, excuse the noise in the background. I finally now have air conditioning in my room, finally, so that's what's going on in the background, so I do apologize for that in advance. Secondly, after 2 unplanned episodes of A Came from England, I am now finally back on schedule, talking about something that I was planning on talking about, you know, for this season ever since, it was first announced, and, of course, this was the kind of episode I've wanted to do, I think, literally ever since, you know, around the time I was making the first season, so I'm now finally glad that I'm doing this, episode. It's another top 5 video, so it's been quite a while since I've done one of those, so the topic for today will be the top 5 saddest moments from British pop culture. And first of all, yes, that is a really long title. Secondly, what exactly do I mean by that? Well, today I'm going to be counting down 5 moments from a variety of British pop culture, whether that would be TV shows, movies, heck, even YouTube shows. So I will be counting down from number 5 being the not so much the saddest moment, and then number 1, of course, being the ultimate tearjerker. So, without further ado, get your tissues ready. We are going to talk about the top 5 saddest moments from British pop culture. Now, for the number 5 spot on the list, I'm going to have to give it to basically any kind of scene from the second episode titled Unikitty, where Unikitty herself was, you know, alone on the road or down the streets, all by herself, without a home, and pretty much without hope. I would put this at number 5 on my list of the saddest moments from British pop culture. Now, I've already talked in depth about this episode when I did my top 5 best second Unikitty episodes video, but yeah, it was definitely, you know, pretty upsetting, you know, see her all alone, you know, without anybody to care for her, and yeah, also, Boris Fangirl, the person who does Unikitty's voice in second she, as I've said multiple times, did a pretty good job, you know, portraying, you know, Unikitty's emotions of being, you know, very unhappy with being in the current situation that she's in. So, yeah, it's quite sad to see, but thankfully, Sek and Cyber finally decided to, you know, officially make her a part of the Flats, and ever since then she's become a main character of second so thankfully there is a positive side to this whole situation, but yeah, that was definitely what I would consider the 5th saddest moments from British pop culture. And it was from a YouTube series, so that's saying a lot. Now, for the number 4 spot on this list, I'm gonna have to give it to the very end of the one Thomas and Friends episode titled Dirty Work, or Diesel's Devious Deed, as it's called in the American dub. Now, I know some of you are thinking, this is like the 3rd episode in a row that you've talked about Thomas and Friends. Aren't you ever going to shut up about it? Not anytime soon, I'm sorry, but, yeah, I did have to mention this one on here because, with Thomas and Friends, yeah, there are a couple of, like, you know, moments where you feel bad for, you know, the characters in, like, a certain kind of situation, but in my opinion, I don't think there was any moment from the show that's about as sad as, you know, what happened to Duck at the very end of Dirty Work. Now, for those of you guys who don't know the context of that episode, it was basically the middle part of a 3-part story arc where Diesel was first introduced into the show, and he had a rivalry with Duck, so I might as well explain, you know, the whole entire saga to you guys. So, Pop Goes to Diesel, which was part 1, featured Diesel coming to the island of Sodor for the very first time. Sir Topham Hatt introduces him to all the other engines. All the other engines were pleased with Diesel. They found him pretty interesting, but Duck kind of had his doubts. He kind of, you know, didn't see Diesel, you know, in a very positive light. And it also didn't help that, like, later on, Diesel boasted to Duck saying, "Oh, Diesels are the best. We don't need to learn anything. We're revolutionary." And then Duck's like, "Okay, if you're revolutionary or rev a thing to me, then why don't you take care of my trucks?" And Diesel tried to do that to show off, didn't work out in his favor since the trucks were old and their brakes were on. And yeah, he found them very hard to pull, which was really entertaining for Duck to watch. And it also made all the other trucks make fun of Diesel by singing him a song titled Pop Goes the Diesel. And then getting into Dirty Work, Diesel now hates Duck for sort of blaming Duck for the reason why the trucks make fun of him all the time, even though in reality it was Diesel's own fault. So Diesel had a plan to get revenge on Duck by having the trucks, you know, refer to Gordon, James, and Henry by a couple bad names, and saying to the trucks that Duck came up with those names. And yeah, Henry, James, and Gordon then assumed Duck actually called them by all those names. So, and then afterwards, Duck wanted to rest in the sheds. However, James, Henry, and Gordon decided to block him from getting into the sheds and said, "Oh, you called us names." Duck's like, "No, I didn't." And they got into a bit of an argument before Sir Topham Hatt came. And as soon as Sir Topham Hatt heard everything from, like, everybody, James, Gordon, Henry, Duck, and even Diesel, Sir Topham Hatt's like, "Okay, Duck, I'll just send you away to work with Edward." And then Duck sadly said, "Okay, yes, sir." At that moment right there, it made you think, oh no, is Sir Topham Hatt actually going to send Duck away for thinking that Duck said all those nasty things to the other engines? Heck, you can even see, like, in that one shot where Duck was about to leave the turntable, you see there's a tear going down his eye. And you normally don't see the engine characters on the show have tears coming out of their eyes, so you could tell right then and there that that was, you know, for sure sad. But thankfully, with A Close Shave, or A Close Shave for Duck as it was called in the American dub, which was the third and final part of the trilogy, Duck was able to prove himself well by preventing the trucks from getting into a nasty accident related to the barber shop. So Sir Topham Hatt then, you know, sends Duck back home to the sheds and mentions to Duck that he got rid of Diesel because, in Sir Topham Hatt's words, he was like, "I never believed in Diesel anyway, so go on back to the sheds, the engines miss you." And yeah, it was a pretty happy ending, but yeah, that middle part was pretty upsetting, especially near the very end. So that's why I had it at the number 4 spot. And I do apologize if that part of the episode was pretty lengthy. Now, funny enough, for the number 3 slot, I don't have as much to talk about as I did with number 4, very ironically, but for the number 3 saddest moment in British pop culture, I'll have to give it to the death of Dumbledore at the very end of Harry Potter and the Half-Blood Prince. Now, some of you Harry Potter fans may argue with me saying, "Oh, but there's, like, other characters that have had, like, you know, more sad deaths, like Dobby from Deathly Hallows Part 1. And yes, while that death was pretty sad, I'll tell you why I think the Dumbledore one was more sad. The music. The music was why I think that moment from the very end of Half-Blood Prince was more depressing. I'm not kidding, you know, the 2 times that I saw Half-Blood Prince, that was always the one part of the movie that made me teary-eyed. I'm not kidding. And yeah, it was very sad. Funny enough, I have not rewatched any of the Harry Potter movies ever since, you know, I first watched them, but yeah, I just remember not being very happy when that happened. I mean, then again, how can you be happy when there's a certain character that passes away? Unless it's like a character you don't like, then I can kind of understand, but Dumbledore was a very likable character, and yeah, that was unfortunate, but yeah, that was what I had to put as the number 3 saddest moment, Dumbledore's death from Harry Potter and the Half-Blood Prince. Now this next one is going to be a little bit controversial since I put this above the Dumbledore's death one, but number 2, I will give it to the very end of Back to School Mr. Bean. Now, I talked about this briefly in my original Mr. Bean review, but there was a scene at the very end where Mr. Bean got distracted. He was about to go back to his car, but he saw like a cupcake stand or some kind of dessert stand and was buying desserts. And then you see in the background, there's a huge tank that like comes by and runs over his car. And then as soon as he gets what he wants, he like looks back at his car and does a double take and then looks back and realizes that it was destroyed. And then you see the look on his face. he was really upset that his car got destroyed, and you could tell it was sad because the audience members saw it and they were like, "Aww." And then like a sad rendition of Mr. Bean's theme song starts playing, which also didn't help with the situation. And yeah, that definitely made me very sad when I first watched it. And heck, every time I do watch that episode, it still gets me teary-eyed. Funny enough, at the very end, after the credits, he gets his lock out. The lock was like the only thing that was actually in good condition after the tank ran over his car. So he got the lock, he's like looking at it, and he's probably thinking in his head, "Oh, well, at least that survived. I'm taking this with me." And then he just walks off, pretty much almost forgetting the fact that his car got destroyed. So yeah, there was a bit of a funny moment at the very end, but leading up to that, it was pretty teary-eyed. And I thought for a while, I'm like, okay, I must be ridiculous for thinking that a moment from Mr. Bean was tear-jerking, but I wasn't the only one. The clip and the full episode have been uploaded on the Mr. Bean YouTube channel, and people have commented the same thing, like, "Oh my gosh, this made me so sad. This was the saddest moment for me." So, yeah, I'm glad I'm not alone for thinking that that moment for Mr. Bean was really sad, but yeah. Number 2 was the very end of Back to School Mr. Bean. Now, there are a few honorable mentions for this list. First of all, the departure of Joe Grant from Doctor Who, the classic series. Kind of, in my opinion, one of the saddest competitive departures I've seen so far in the classic series. And then the episode from the modern series, Father's Day, that had some pretty, teary moments here and there. And then, speaking on topic of Mr. Bean, the very end of Mind the Baby Mr. Bean was also kind of, tear-jerking, but kind of in a different way from, like, Back to School. While with Back to School, it was sad in, like, a very, depressing way. With the very end of Mind the Baby Mr. Bean, where he saves the baby from, like, being flown up into the air with all those balloons and gets reunited with his mother, that was more sad in, like, a happy kind of way. Like, you're happy that, like, the baby's reunited with his mother, and, yeah, it was more of a, sweet sort of sadness, unlike Back to School Mr. Bean. But, enough of my rambling. Now I'm finally going to talk about the number 1, what I personally think is the saddest moment from British pop culture. And in my opinion, the number 1 saddest moment from British pop culture will be the very end of Doomsday from Doctor Who. Now, I did mention a couple of other Doctor Who moments in my honorable mentions, but this moment right here was what I think so far is the saddest moment from Doctor Who, both classic and modern. Now, I have not touched on the modern series yet on A Came From England, but as of right now, I have seen the first 3 seasons of it, as well as the first 3 Christmas specials. And I saw Doomsday last month for the very first time, alongside the rest of Season 2, and yeah, Army of Ghosts and Doomsday, which was like a 2-part finale for Season 2, that was really cool. And it was awesome that, like, after, like, 43 years of being on TV, we finally got to see the Daleks and the Cybermen interact with one another. But at the very end, when the Doctor, put, like, all the Daleks and the Cybermen into some kind of, portal, Rose, almost, like, goes through it too, but then, like, her father from an alternate universe then, saves her before she gets into the portal. And, yeah, the Doctor, unfortunately for Rose, she has to be stuck in the, parallel universe and not travel with the Doctor anymore. And the interaction between the two at the very end, was very, tear-jerking, where the Doctor, sort of talks to Rose through, basically, the TARDIS was, like, right near the sun, and he used, like, the sun's energy to sort of portray a video message to her, in the alternate universe, and yeah, it was pretty tear-jerking, and honestly, if I'm not mistaken, that was, like, one of the first times that I've ever heard, like, a companion say to the Doctor, "I love you." I never hear that very often from any of his other companions. And then, at the very end, just when you thought, the Doctor was going to say, "I love you" back to Rose, he then says, "Rose Tyler," and then, the message then, ends off right there, and Rose starts to cry about it. And even in the Doctor's, like, side of things. You can even see a tear running down his eye as well, so yeah. It was a very sad moment altogether. It was especially more heartbreaking since Rose was like the very first companion of Modern Who, and she had a very close relationship with the Doctor, both the 9th Doctor and the 10th Doctor, so yeah, it was very sad to see her go, but yeah, that was what I would consider the saddest moment from any sort of British pop culture. But with that being said, let me know, do you have a moment from a British TV show or movie, or even a YouTube series that you think is pretty sad? And do you agree or disagree with my opinions? Feel free to let me know in the comments below. But with that being said, that is about it for this episode of AK from England. If you enjoyed, feel free to give it a like. Subscribe to the channel if you want to see more episodes of AK from England, and just mediocre plush content in general. Leave a comment down below, let me know what you think. That is about it. This is Tyler from the Character Workshop, signing out. Next time, I'm going to be talking about the Claymation Penguin. For real this time.